I'm Nick Schiffer with NS Builders out of Boston, Massachusetts, and today we're in Wellesley at our 45 White Oak project. And this is our spec home. This is a project that we are redefining builder grade by building at an absolutely uncompromised level. And today, I want to walk you through all the details behind the plaster. You've seen us do blue board and plaster before, but I want to talk about high quality modern details. It is not drywall, it is actually blue board. And blue board is very similar to what you would consider to be drywall because it has a gypsum core and then a paper face. What makes this blue board is that, well, it does have a hint of blue. The chemical makeup of the paper is designed for a veneer coat plaster, meaning that we're mixing essentially a mud troweled on the entire surface. Now, drywall, typically you're only doing penetrations or screws and seams. Sometimes with a level 5, you'll actually coat the entire surface, but it's a completely different chemical makeup. Plaster dries a lot harder. It's dense, it's a lot stronger in terms of the surface, but it's just something we typically do here in Massachusetts. And I want to start with what's behind me in one of our door jambs. These are easy concept, easy jambs, and this door right here is called an in-swing jamb. The in-swing jamb means that this door is actually going to swing out, but when it does swing in, it actually sits completely flush with this face. We have a large slab door. I'll push that open, so that's that swing. You can see how it swings all the way through that 2x4 wall and comes flush with this wall. And then this mud flange here actually is tied back to our framing. Now, in this case, because we do have a thicker drywall, a lot of times you'll see that board go right behind the mud flange. In our case, we actually had to notch this, and they'll come back and use a fiber tape to create a bridge between this before they plaster this whole surface. That goes all the way up and captures the strike side as well as the hinge side. They're also solid steel, which makes them really strong and not prone to cracking. So as we work our way out from kind of the center of this jamb, you're gonna notice a couple things. We have a completely headless transition. So as I open and close this door actually swings just about a 1/4 inch away from our finished ceiling. Now I'm gonna point out something really important. That light, which is about 7 inches away from this door swing, if that was in the wrong position, we'd be out of luck in the sense that that door could potentially hit that. Same thing with smoke detectors. So when you're doing a floor to ceiling door, you gotta make sure that you're keeping that ceiling clear. Now, that's also a critical moment where we're gonna use a straight edge to make sure that that ceiling's perfectly flat, because if you have any dips in it and you go to open that door is going to rub. Now, as you work your way to the left, you actually have a stop bead, and that stop bead ties into our door jamb and then is spaced away from our vertical transition into the wood. With mentioning the vertical oak here, it's important to note why we have that, because most of the time you only see the white oak on the flat ceiling or the pitch ceiling. But as you look around the room, that pitch ceiling comes down and really creates this datum point. So basically saying that as that comes down, that stops, and then our plaster starts at that elevation. So what we're doing is we're continuing that datum line across and over here, meaning that we don't want that to be plaster where it goes up into essentially our roof line. We want to have that nice straight line all the way around. You're really allowing the plaster to be its own really square, very vertical moment. Now, working your way down, this is where you're actually going to start to see how we're accomplishing our 3/8 reveal. This is called a museum base. Museum base meaning that we have a small shadow gap at the very bottom of our wall and that transitions into our floor. That's finished flooring that we've installed prior to plastering the wall. In order of operations, we're actually boarding the wall and we're putting essentially what we call a ground. So we'll go around and put a ground or a piece of plywood at the very bottom of the wall. So as they put the board, they drop the board down on top of that ground. When the board's screwed off, we come back and we take the ground out, and it leaves the perfect amount of space to then come in and install our floor, and then we install our 3/8 reveal bead. Now that reveal bead, you can see, is essentially construction adhesive or fastened, sometimes with screws, even sometimes with hot melt glue. What we want is that this reveal bead is attached to our blue board. We do not want to screw this into our framing. We want it to become part of our surface that is the blue board. That should all work together in unison, and then essentially when it gets all plastered, it's moving and kind of expanding and contracting as one piece. Now, essentially this is what creates our gap and then our trimless condition here. So as we work our way through this door, you actually start to see some of the finished plaster. You see finished plaster here, but this door is essentially the opposite of what that one is. And what I mean by that is when this door shuts, it is not an in-swing door, and I'll show you what that means. When I shut this door actually sits flush with this side. So this is just a single rabbet jamb, regular door. So as the door swings, it sits on this side completely flush. But you can see how this finished detail ends up working out. So you have your finished, this is not our finished plaster, but this could be our finished plaster that hits our corner bead. And then that is essentially your trimless detail. Same thing with at the bottom here, you have our 3/8 reveal, and this is all our plaster. Now that looks unfinished because it is. In terms of how we plaster this wall gets completely prepped, all of the seams, all of the screw holes, anything on this wall that is considered imperfection or something that is not just the paper face gets cleaned up and detailed with fiber mesh, construction adhesive, additional fasteners, and then we're doing a scratch coat. And a lot of times that scratch coat is just on the critical areas, the corner beads, the seams, and we're setting the stage to make sure that we're prepped and ready for an entire veneer coat across the whole wall. Now, speaking of corner beads, it's really critical we use a metal corner bead here, and you'll see it in some spots where that corner bead can project pretty far off of the blue board, because we're not relying on the blue board to be perfectly plumb or perfectly square. We're setting our corner beads and using those as reference points. So if we were to check where this door jamb is and that corner bead, and we took a straight edge, that straight edge should follow straight across both surfaces at the same exact plane, and everything in between essentially gets built in or out with plaster. That's critical for all of the reveals that go into modern detailing. So in terms of this wall, it looks as though this would be considered finished plaster. If you're familiar with New England or Massachusetts and how we plaster, a lot of times that's what the wall looks like right before we paint. It's very common for us to plaster our walls. It's also very common for us to paint the plaster after. That would be what we would paint at this point in time. This right here is our base layer, and we're essentially doing this throughout the entirety of the home. And at the very end, when all of this is done and everything is plastered, rather than painting, we're actually doing a Venetian plaster throughout. And that Venetian plaster is really designed to be kind of a natural plaster finish. It's very white, it has a cloudy texture. It really plays on what we've been doing in the home, is letting materials be the materials. The white oak is finished with a natural oil finish. The marble is a natural material that will wear and tear. Plaster will be a raw plaster, and ultimately will be sealed with an oil soap finish. When I work my way into the primary, we start to see some of the details getting very close to the final condition. This window specifically, the panoramic install. The glass is surface to surface, wall to wall, sill to shade pocket glass. How we're doing that is you can actually see here. So all of our windows are fabricated, they're solid white oak windows. And right now you'll see that 3/4 inch white oak. And then we have this small, tiny 1 to 2 millimeter space. Trade tip, we actually use a piece of ram board. We stuff it in there and push that stop bead against it, giving us a separation. We want a very clean, straight line between materials. When you don't use a stop bead, that material is going to spill into the other material and just create a messy line. The way that this is detailed, from this surface, the face of this, to the face of here, just under 1/8 of an inch difference. So we just wanted to capture the edge of that white oak by 1/8 of an inch, because this is radiused. So right now, if you look really closely, there's about a 1/16 of an inch left of that stop bead. That is for our final veneer coat of our Venetian plaster. So that Venetian plaster will catch that edge, they'll drag it out. And going back to the corner bead, this corner bead is set to make sure it's parallel with here. Say this window is slightly off plumb or has a slight difference in reveal, we would look to make sure that this is parallel with the window. We work with the craftspeople such as Trowel Inc., where they really understand how to follow the right reference point. A lot of this does come down to the look and feel of what the final condition is. As we walk our way through into the primary, you're gonna start to see what I was talking about with this corner bead. This is our scratch coat. This is essentially setting our corner bead. But as you work your way around this corner here, I'm gonna just use this as a straight edge, but you can see just how far that corner bead is off of our finished blue board. So a lot of times you'd see that corner bead tucked really tight to our board, but instead this has been set out because this is referencing at the very top where the soffit is, that this is also to line up with the corner bead on the other side of this wall here, as well as the millwork that's gonna fill the space between. So they wanna make sure that this wall is completely in the same line to allow millwork to fit. We have no tolerance in any of the millwork in this home, so plaster has to be where it needs to be. This is actually a great example here. When you look up at this corner bead is built out almost 3/4 of an inch. And you can see as you work your way up, what they're trying to do is they're hitting that corner where the flat ceiling and the angled ceiling hits exactly in that corner, and they're bringing that corner bead down, and then down here, they're trying to hit the millwork piece. So you can see that corner bead actually bends in this direction. The further it comes down, the further it spaces out, but that's because it has to hit a point for the millwork, and then they'll take that reference point, and that reference point comes back to here, which is why this corner bead is built out. So all of these things are being considered when they're prepping for plaster. It would have been very easy to just, hey, the framer put the wall here, we put 5/8 board on, we'll put the bead tight, we'll plaster it, and then we go to put the millwork in, and something doesn't align. It's not what we want. This is really where these modern details take the time and take a lot of effort to make sure that they're being really thought out way in advance of actually executing them. It's very slow, it's very considerate and obviously intentional, but it's what makes the difference between a great plaster job and something that is more typical. As we work our way through the bedroom, what you'll notice is here's a great example of a dissimilar surface. You have the white oak ceiling coming down and breaking from the angle to the flat. We have a stop bead up there that essentially spaces that off of that white oak. What happens a lot of times when you do have two materials touching each other, the most common detail that you see is they're caulking it. They're running some sort of color match caulking that might match one surface and not the other. We want those materials to be separated, create that shadow line, and that shadow line creates a really crisp, straight line. It always looks better. As we work our way down here, we actually have these floor to ceiling pocket doors. These cavity slider pocket doors are installed in a way that when they're open, they don't feel like a door. And what I mean by that, there's no trim and there's no jamb. So this pocket door here, right here, opens up and hits our wall. And when it's open, it sits completely flush with the wall. These are my opinions. I love a soft close. You want to open that up, let it soft close against the wall. I do not like soft open because when you're opening it and you throw it in the cavity, you know, sure, it slowly goes in the cavity, but when you go to pull it out, it's more difficult. And I will say Cavity Slider actually improved on that. It's actually one of the better units I've used where you do pull it out, it actually reduces that tension. But frankly, I find that most people are just pushing it into the pocket, and sure, it might bounce out, but they're not slamming it open as much as they're slamming it closed. What takes a lot of effort here is how we handle the head jamb. So what we're looking at is essentially, we have the aluminum pocket door frame on either side, and then we have blue board that ties back to our pocket door. And what they've done is they made sure that this door, number one, you gotta make sure you order a door slab that stays super flat. And number two, when you're spacing this, you wanna make sure you're leaving enough space for hardware. Now we don't have hardware on the side here. We actually have hardware that will be on the end, but sometimes that hardware can stick off 1/8 of an inch, and you wanna make sure you're giving enough clearance so that when it goes in the pocket, it's not rubbing here. But again, you can see that stop bead, you can see that corner bead, and you can see how if I were to run a straight edge, all of this is lined up all the way across, and at the floor, we're bringing our 3/8 reveal all the way around the corner. Even the door is left up off the floor, of course, but you're getting nice consistency throughout. Now, all of the doors are also being plastered. So this door here was specifically ordered at a thickness to make sure that we could then veneer on top of this. So this is our base coat of plaster. It's a little bit rougher, and then they'll come through and do Venetian plaster. So when this door is open, or when the swing doors are closed, you have this consistent material all the way through. Again, no paint. The question that comes up all the time is, well, what happens if you have to service a pocket door? Say you damage something, you need to remove the door. So what you're looking at above, on this side, this is all plaster. You can see the mesh tape, you can see how the stop bead's been glued to the blue board, and you can see that nice consistent gap. The door is up in the ceiling, but on the other side, you'll actually notice that there's a piece missing. And the reason is, where you'll see that the stop bead is only about 3/4 of an inch thick, and now you have this giant gap. What we've done is we'll actually have a piece of trim there that will be plastered, and it will sit up on rare earth magnets completely flush, nice straight line. We're not going to try to hide it. We're not going to caulk it in. We'll have a nice straight line and that's why we've done the stop bead on the edge of the board there, but it is removable. So if I have to, I can take that piece of trim down and I can then access the hardware. Is it the easiest thing in the world? No. But you can access it, you can adjust the door, and you can do 90% of what has to happen in order to get that door fixed. And if you have to take it out, sure, there might be an opportunity where you have to remove some plaster if you're creating that much damage. And then as we work our way out of the primary, I just want to call attention to this triangle piece. You don't have a lot of triangles of plaster in the home, but where you do, there's a stop bead that sits against that white oak ceiling that does not get caulked. It is separated. And the last thing I want to talk about is our HVAC and our electrical. So above here, we have our recessed lighting, and those are flangeless lights. So those lights get installed and then plastered right to, if you look closely, there's a trim ring there, and that trim ring is essentially what you're referencing for your final coat of plaster. Now, if you look close enough, you'll notice that that trim ring is slightly lower than the plaster right now because it is prepped for our Venetian coat. So all of these reference points are what will be the finish coat. And then same thing with our HVAC. We worked with CNC partner, Barney and Carey, who we work with our Millwork company a lot, and we actually took this piece of PVC and then we milled the top of the PVC and then created this little flange detail, or this stop bead detail. It's about 1/8 of an inch. And the reason we made these is every supply here required a certain amount of free-flowing square inches. And we wanted to make sure that we had consistency throughout in terms of the shape. So we worked with the HVAC engineer, the team at AGS. They gave us the square inches to hit for each location. And then we essentially custom made them to be consistent throughout. So when you look up, again, these are plastered in, but you have this tiny little bead that's still left. So when we do our final coat, we'll come through and you'll just have this about 1 inch by 36 inch slot with perfect radius corners that match the ones that we did in the wood ceiling. So there's one more area of plaster in this home that's different than everything I walked through. So I want to take you guys outside to the 2 pavilion spaces and show you what we're doing there. This is actually the outdoor living pavilion, or outdoor living room as we're calling it. And we also have across the way the outdoor kitchen, and they're actually prepping that one right now. They get the cement board in the ceiling and they're doing floor protection. Plaster is not something that you typically hear on the outside of a home. Think about it as stucco. And we've essentially done a stucco ceiling or a plaster ceiling out here, which is a waterproof and weatherproof plaster system. So we've got a cement board and then we have multiple layers built up. And then what you see here is a white finish. And if you look really closely, it has that natural finish to it, cloudiness, texture to it. This will get no paint. It's done exactly the same as all the ceilings on the inside. And I want to just call attention to one thing out here, specific to how it interacts with irregular surfaces. Now there's an area inside at the skylight when you're on that second floor hallway where that flat ceiling comes over and actually dies into the backside of our shingles for that skylight. It's exactly what's going on here. So as you're looking down the side of the home, you have the shingles, and the shingles actually hang down about 2.5 to 3 inches here. The plaster board is coming over against the shingle. If I was bringing the surface over and I was going to put a stop bead on the end of my board, that stop bead is coming parallel to the one on the other side, and the moment it hits one shingle, we stop. And what that means is that in one area, there's a point where that stop bead is hitting the shingle, but in everywhere else, the shingles are, there's so much undulation to those shingles that you have this gap between the edge of the board and the plaster. This goes back to the dissimilar surfaces. We don't want to try to follow those shingles. We want to create a nice defining straight line. It really is a much higher quality detail than trying to follow that or bridge that material. Plus you have the shingle that has the bottom lip on it that actually captures a lot of that edge. This ceiling here is essentially a stucco system, which is final coat plastered with a natural plaster that is sealed, and that is the same color that will be used inside. And what's nice, in my opinion, is that in this case, and even in the kitchen, you go from a plaster ceiling to the white oak ceiling in the living room. As you can see, this is what it takes to build a really high quality modern home, the forethought and the insight that goes into all of the decisions prior to actually doing the work.